In the spring of 2009, a man with a clean clipboard and a county-issued truck stood at the edge of a wheat field in Pawnee County, Kansas, and told Verna Holt that what she was doing was a hobby. He did not say it cruelly. He said it the way a man says a thing he has never once been wrong about, with a small, patient smile. And he wrote a number on his form that said, "Her yield per acre would never pay." 11 years later, in the brown summer of 2020, when the wells across that county dropped and the rain quit for 2 seasons running, a grain buyer from Wichita drove the same gravel road, looked at the only green field for 40 miles, and offered Verna a price per bushel that the man with the clipboard would not have believed if she had read it to him aloud. Let me tell you about the span of years between those 2 mornings, because the story of how that number came to be is the only thing worth telling. Verna was 61 that first spring, and she had farmed the same 640 acres her grandfather broke from sod in 1911. She was known in the county for 2 things. She was the quietest woman at any gathering, the one who listened at the back of the room and left before the coffee was poured, the kind of person other people forgot was there till they realized she had heard every word. And she kept a wheat nobody else would plant, a tall, old red-bearded variety her family called Czech red, brought across the ocean in the lining of a coat and grown on that ground for 98 years without a break. The story in the family was that her grandfather, František, had sown a double handful of seed into the hem of his good coat the week before he left the old country, because a man could be robbed of money and papers at any port, but no inspector ever thought to feel the weight in a hem, and that the first crop on the Kansas claim came from that handful, multiplied out 1 careful season at a time until it filled a field. Her dog, a rangy blue heeler named Pick, rode in the truck bed and slept across the threshold of the seed shed, and the 2 of them walked the field lines most mornings before the sun cleared the grain bins, the old woman reading the crop and the dog reading the old woman. The man with the clipboard was named Dale Orey. He was 44, an extension agent with a master's degree in agronomy from a good land-grant school, and he was not a bad man. He believed the way a doctor believes in a thermometer, that a field was a set of numbers and the numbers could only be improved. He had come out that morning to enroll farmers in a new variety program, a semi-dwarf, hard red winter wheat, bred for uniform height and heavy nitrogen response, the kind that had pushed county averages up by 1/3 in a decade. He stood at Verna's fence and looked at her, stand, tall and uneven, and headed out into beards that caught the light, and he frowned the way a tidy man frowns at a sock drawer somebody else arranged. "This is sentiment, Verna," he said. He tapped his pen against the clipboard. "I understand it. My grandfather farmed too, but the new lines will out-yield this by 20 bushels an acre, and they stand up to the combine and they take the fertilizer. What you've got here is a museum, a nice one. It won't carry the note." He smiled. "It's a hobby with a tractor attached to it." Verna looked at the field a while before she answered. She had a way of letting a silence sit until it had weight. It carried 98 years, she said, that was all. She did not argue the bushels. She knew her bushels were lower. She had always known. Dale wrote his number, left a glossy folder on the fence post, and drove off in the white truck, and the folder sat there until the wind took it into the ditch and Pick carried it back like a retrieved bird and dropped it, and Verna put it in the burn barrel without opening it. Now, I want to be fair to Dale Orey, because this is not a story about a foolish man. He was right about almost everything he said. The semi-dwarf wheat did out-yield the old red. It did stand up straighter and take more fertilizer and thresh cleaner. By every measure the county knew how to take. The new wheat was simply better, and the men who switched to it in those years made more money than Verna did, season after season for a long time. If you had stood at that fence in 2009 and bet on the numbers, you would have bet against the old woman and her tall, uneven field, and for 11 years you would have been collecting. Let me tell you about the wheat itself, because the whole story lives inside what that wheat was. The check read that Verna grew was what people now call a landrace, which is a plain word for a population of plants that has never been made uniform. A modern wheat variety is a single genetic line, every plant nearly identical to its neighbor, bred to perform when conditions are good and inputs are steady. A landrace is not one thing. In Verna's field, no two plants were quite the same. Some headed early and some late. Some ran tall and some stayed short. Some put their energy into deep roots and some into seed. Some had a waxy bloom on the leaf that held water, and some did not. To Dale Ory's eye, this was disorder, a failure to optimize, the reason her yield trailed the county. To the field itself, it was an insurance policy a century deep. Her grandfather had not known the word genetics when he carried that seed across the water. He knew that in a dry year, some plants in the old country lived and some died, and the ones that lived made the seed for the next year, and over enough years the field became a record of every drought it had survived. He had selected the way the land selects, by keeping what came through. Verna did the same. Each summer she walked the field before harvest and pulled heads from the plants that had done best under whatever that year had thrown at them, and that hand-pulled seed went into the cloth bags in the shed, and that seed planted the corners. She was not preserving a relic. She was running an experiment that had been running for 4 generations, and the field she stood in was its result. She kept all of it written down. There was a ledger in the kitchen, a thick canvas-bound book her grandfather had started, and her mother had continued, and she had carried on, and in it were the dates of every planting, and every rain, and every harvest weight since 1911. Let me tell you what was in that book, because it mattered later more than the deed did. It held the rainfall of 100 springs. It held which corners of which fields held moisture longest, the low draw in the northwest quarter that stayed green a week past everything else, the gravel knob in the southeast that burned off first and told you early what kind of year you were going to have. It held a note in her mother's hand from the dry year of 1956 that read, "The short tillering plants by the draw came through, saved their seed," and a note from her grandfather from the dust years that read only, "We ate." The book was the brain of the operation, and the seed was its body, and Verna was for the time being its keeper. Around the time Dale came to the fence, Verna's grandson came home. His name was Theo, he was 24, and he had a degree in agricultural economics and a year at a grain marketing firm in Kansas City that had not suited him. He came back because his mother asked him to help his grandmother, who was getting older, alone on the place, and he came back convinced, in the gentle way of educated young people, that she was throwing money in the dirt every spring. "Grandma, I ran the numbers," he said his first week, spreading printouts on the kitchen table under the hanging lamp while Pick watched from the doorway. "If you switched the whole 640 to the new hard red, even at current input costs, you'd net 40, maybe 50,000 more a year. I can show you the spreadsheet." He was not unkind. He loved her. He simply believed, like Dale, that the old field was a sentiment she could not afford. Verna poured him coffee. "Show me, in August," she said. which was not an answer, and Theo did not understand it then. That was the same year that a man named Russ Coyle, whose place ran along Verna's south line, borrowed against his ground to do the thing right. Russ was 50, a good farmer and a good neighbor. And I want you to like him because he did everything the county and the bank and the agronomist told him to do, and he did it with skill. He tore out his fence-row trees to square his fields for the bigger equipment, the old Osage hedge his own father had planted as a windbreak, because the trees cost him 8 rows of crop along every edge, and the new economics said 8 rows was money lying in the shade. He bought a new self-propelled sprayer for the price of a house, a high-clearance machine with a boom 90 feet wide and a cab quieter than his living room, and he was proud of it the way a man is proud of a thing he has worked his whole life to be able to buy. He planted the semi-dwarf wheat fence to fence, every plant the same height, the same maturity, the same thirsty, efficient machine, and the first years it came in heavy and clean, and Russ painted his bins and put a down payment on a lake lot. And at the coffee shop in town, men nodded at Russ and shook their heads at Verna and Theo. Watching the 2 fields from the section road, felt the pull of the obvious. Russ was not wrong to want what he wanted. He wanted to leave his children more than his father had left him, and the only road anyone could see to that was the road the experts had paved, and he took it at speed because that was the kind of farmer he was, and the bank loved him for it. And for a while so did the rain. Let me tell you how the next years went, because the divergence is the heart of it, and it took a long time to show. For 7 seasons the numbers told Dale Ory's story. Russ Coyle's new wheat beat Verna's old red by 15 to 20 bushels an acre nearly every year, and Russ scaled up, leasing 2 more quarters, running the sprayer across more ground, carrying more debt against more land at an interest rate that looked small when wheat was selling. Theo kept his grandmother's books because she asked him to, and every fall he wrote her harvest weight beside the county average and saw her trailing it. And every fall he said nothing, because she had asked him only to write it down, not to comment. Theo, though, was a watcher like his grandmother, even if he did not know it yet. And across those seasons he began to notice things the spreadsheet did not have a column for. He noticed that Verna's field stayed greener 3 days longer into a dry spell than Russ's did, that there was a morning each June when the south field across the fence had gone the dull blue-gray of a thirsty crop, and the north field was still holding its color, and that the difference was not in anything either farmer had done that week, but in something the seed had decided generations before. He noticed that when a hailstorm came through in 2013 and flattened Russ's uniform stand, because every plant was the same height and caught the stones the same way, Verna's uneven field lost the tall plants. He had stood at that fence the morning after the hail with a clipboard of his own, a habit he had not yet broken, and counted. Russ's field laid flat in long-combed rows like a head of hair pushed the wrong way, and Verna's field standing ragged and broken, the short plants that the tall ones had sheltered now bearing the whole of the harvest. He noticed that Verna spent almost nothing on fertilizer and nothing at all on fungicide, that the chemical shed, which on Russ's place was a long steel building with a concrete bund and a locked door, was on Verna's place a single shelf with a few jugs gone cloudy from age. And he noticed that when a leaf rust ran through the county one wet June and Russ sprayed twice to save his single susceptible variety, paying for the chemical and the custom application both, Verna's crowd of a field had enough resistant plants scattered through it that the rust hit a wall and stopped, and she never opened a jug. And at the end of that month, her cost sheet had a blank where his had a bill. Why doesn't it spread in your field? Theo asked her that June, genuinely puzzled, holding a rust-spotted leaf he had pulled from the fence line between the two farms. Let me tell you what she told him, because it was the first time the conversation turned. A disease is looking for the same door in every house, she said. Rust planted one house 600 times. The rust finds the door once. It's in all of them. My field is 600 different houses. The rust knocks, and most of the doors don't open. She took the leaf from him and turned it over. Your grandfather called it a firewall. Doesn't stop the fire. Stops it spreading. It was the most Theo had ever heard her say at once, and he wrote it in the back of the ledger that night. The first thing he had ever added to the book in his own hand. That was the flicker. He would tell you later he did not convert that June, that he still half believed. She was a sentimental old woman who had gotten lucky with the rust. Doubt of his doubt, though, had begun, which is where every conversion starts, and he started walking the field with her in the mornings, Pick ranging ahead of them through the tall heads, and asking questions. And she answered them the way she did everything, slowly, and only when she had something true to say. He would ask why she did not just buy the resistant variety the university had bred, the one with the rust gene bred into it, and she would say that a bred-in gene was one lock the disease only had to pick once, and that a field of one lock was a field waiting for the right key, and that her field had 1,000 different locks and no key fit them all. He would ask why she did not at least fertilize harder to push the yield, and she would crumble a handful of her soil in front of him, dark and loose and smelling of rain, even in a dry week, and say that the ground made its own nitrogen if you fed the life in it and did not burn it out, and that Russ's ground, sprayed and worked and pushed, had gone the color and texture of pavement at the headlands, where the spray drifted heaviest. Theo had no column for any of it, and he started, that summer, keeping a second set of notes that were not numbers at all, just things he had seen. And he did not tell her he was doing it, though she knew, because she knew most things she did not say. Around the midpoint of those years, Dale Ori came back. There was a field day in 2015, a county thing. Farmers gathered at the elevator to hear the new recommendations, and Dale was the speaker, and Verna sat in the back, as she always did, with her hands folded. Dale put his slides up on the screen, county yields climbing, the new varieties pulling the average, and near the end someone asked about the old land races, whether there was anything to keeping them. And Dale glanced toward the back of the room, not unkindly, and gave the room his answer. Look, there's heritage value, sure, he said. It's a nice thing to keep a few acres for, but as a production strategy in this county, on this kind of dryland ground, it's a boutique liability. It can't compete. The data's just not close. He said it gently, and a few men chuckled, and Verna did not change her expression, and Theo, sitting beside her now, felt his face go hot in a way that surprised him. A boutique liability. He had used nearly those words himself at that kitchen table 6 years before. Hearing them in Dale's mouth, aimed at his grandmother's quiet, folded hands, he found he did not like them at all. If you are watching this and you have ever sat in a room while someone with a degree explained to you why the thing your family knew was worthless, I would be glad to know it. Leave a word below if you have. Then let me tell you what came next, because the weather was about to do the arguing. The first sign came in the fall of 2018, though no one read it as a sign at the time. The rains that usually came to set the winter wheat simply did not, and the crop went into the ground dry and came up thin. and everyone said it would catch up in spring the way it usually did. Through 2019, the county ran short of normal, but not alarmingly so, and Russ Coyle made a below-average crop and was not worried, because he had made big crops for years, and the bank still liked him and the lake lot was paid for. Dale Ory's office put out a bulletin recommending varieties for continued moderate conditions, and the recommendation was sound for the conditions everyone expected. Then came 2020, and the rain did not return, and the county learned a word it had heard only from its grandparents. Let me tell you what a real drought does, because it does not do what you think. It does not simply make a field dry. It rations the year. The subsoil moisture that a wheat plant draws on in May, the water banked deep from the autumn and winter before, was not there, because the autumn and winter before had been dry too. A wheat plant lives on two accounts, the rain that falls on it this spring and the water already in the bank below it. And in 2020, both accounts were empty at once. And that is the difference between a dry year a farm shrugs off and a drought a farm does not survive. So the crop came to the hinge of its life, the few weeks in late spring when the head fills and the grain plumps, with nothing in the bank to draw on. And the semi-dwarf wheat, bred for a world of steady inputs and adequate water, bred to push everything into a heavy, uniform head, had no other plan. It had been selected over decades to be magnificent in the average year, and selecting hard for one thing always means selecting away from something else, and the something else it had lost was the ragged old caution of a plant that does not bet everything on the rain arriving. Every plant in Russ Coyle's field did the same thing at the same time, reached for water that was not there at the same moment, and ran out together. By the middle of May, his field, fence to fence, every plant the same height, turned the same pale color in the same week, and the heads that formed were light and shrunken, the kernels inside them no bigger than grass seed, and there was nothing he could spray and nothing he could buy that would put water in the ground that the sky had not delivered. He drove that 90-foot boom across it twice that spring out of habit and hope, spending money on a crop that was already gone, because doing something felt better than watching. Verna's field did not do that. Let me tell you why, because this is the whole mechanism, and it is worth understanding. In a crowd, the plants are not on the same schedule. Some of Verna's wheat had headed early and filled its grain before the worst of the heat, and made it through. Some had the deep roots her grandfather's dry year selections had carried forward, and reached water the shallow modern roots could not. Some had the waxy bloom that slowed water loss through the leaf. No single plant in her field was the perfect plant for 2020, because there is no such thing as the perfect plant for a year you cannot predict. Scattered through her 600 different houses, though, were enough plants that happened to hold the right cards for that particular brutal hand, and they carried the field while the rest fell away. It was the firewall again, only now the fire was the sky. Through that May, Theo drove the section road between the two farms every morning, and the contrast stopped him cold. To the south, Russ's ground pale and short, and finished a uniform failure. To the north, his grandmother's, green and tall and ragged and alive, headed out unevenly into beards that still caught the light the way they had the morning Dale Ory leaned on the fence 11 years before. He understood, finally and completely, standing in the road with the engine running. He went and found her in the seed shed, hand-cleaning the bags for the corners, Pick asleep across the doorway, in the heat, and he could not think of what to say. So he said the only true thing. "I'm sorry it took me this long." Verna did not look up from the seed. "You watched," she said. That's all I ever asked." Then she handed him a cloth bag, the one her mother had marked in 1956. The short tillering plants by the draw came through, and she said, "These are yours to keep now." And that was the transmission, though Theo did not know to call it that and would not have, because she would not have wanted the word. Let me tell you about the casualties, because this is not a story that mocks them. Russ Coyle abandoned a quarter of his crop that year because it was not worth the diesel to cut it. He had 1,100 acres in the new wheat across his leased and owned ground, and across all of it he averaged 8 bushels an acre, when his break-even with the debt and the inputs and the lease payments was closer to 30. He sat at Verna's kitchen table in June, a proud man with grease on his hands and his hat in his lap, and he did not say much either, and Verna poured him coffee and did not say "I told you so," because she had not told him anything. She had only farmed her own ground her own way and let him farm his. He turned the hat in his hands a long while before he spoke, and when he did, his voice came out, broken in the middle, the way a strong man's voice does, when it is not used to the work it is being asked to do. "I did everything. He started, and stopped and started again. Every meeting, every recommendation, I kept the receipts." He was not asking her for anything. He was trying to understand how a man could be right at every single step and wrong at the end of all of them, and there is no arithmetic that answers that, and Verna did not pretend there was. She just kept his cup full and let him sit in her kitchen until he was ready to drive home. The lake lot would go that fall to cover the operating note, and the 2 leased quarters would go back to their owners, and Russ would farm half the ground in 2021 that he had farmed in 2019. He had done everything right. That was the part that could not be made to balance. He had done every single thing the experts and the bank and the data told him to do, and he had done it well, and it had ruined him, and the quiet, uneven field across the fence that everyone had pitied for 11 years had not even been irrigated. Then the buyer came, and I want to slow down here, because this is the morning the whole story had been walking toward. His name was Gil Maddox, and he bought specialty grain for a mill that supplied artisan bakeries from Denver to Chicago, the kind of mill that paid for flavor and protein and provenance and did not care about bushels per acre at all. He had heard, the way buyers hear things, that there was an old, hard red landrace still being grown unbroken on its original ground in Pawnee County. And in the drought summer of 2020, when most of the county's wheat was light and shriveled and grating feed, he drove out to see the one field that had come through. He was a spare, unhurried man in his 60s who had spent 40 years putting his hands into grain, and he had the habit, common to people who are very good at one narrow thing, of going quiet when he was working. He walked it with Verna and Theo and Pick in the long evening light, saying nothing for the better part of an hour, stopping every so often to strip a head into his palm and tilt the kernels under the low sun, hard and amber and small and dense. He pulled a head from the middle of the field and rolled the kernels in his palm and bit one and stood a long time with his eyes half closed, not speaking, chewing slowly, and Theo found he was holding his breath the way you hold it waiting on a doctor to finish reading a chart. "This protein," Gil said finally. He was not a man who wasted words. "And the flavor in the bran. You can't breed this back once it's gone. Nobody's kept a line like this. The breeders bred the flavor out, chasing yield 40 years ago, and called it progress." He looked at the field, then at the old woman, and there was something close to anger in him, though not at her. "How many acres did you bring through?" 410 made grain. Verna said. "The rest I'll cut for seed." Gil did the arithmetic in his head, the way men in his trade do. Then he named his price. He did not offer it as an opening, and he did not look at Theo to see how it landed the way a man does when he is bluffing. He said it the way you state a fact, flat and final, and he said he would not negotiate it because it was what the grain was worth, and he did not insult grain. $12 a bushel. The county elevator that week was paying 4.25 for the feed-grade wheat that had survived elsewhere, when it would take it at all. Gil Maddox offered 12 firm for the whole of it, and a standing contract for every bushel Verna could grow, for as long as she cared to grow it. For a moment, nobody in that field said anything. The wind moved through the tall heads. Pick lifted his head from the dust and put it down again. Theo stood with the number ringing in him like a struck bell, because he had kept the books for 11 years. He had written the harvest weight beside the county average every single fall, and he knew exactly what that number meant against every spreadsheet he had ever built. It landed harder than any figure he had ever calculated, because it was not a projection. It was a price a man had offered for something real, standing in the dirt that grew it. Verna only nodded, once the way she nodded at most things. Let me tell you what $12 a bushel on 410 acres came to, because the number is the point. At roughly 30 bushels an acre, the yield her drought-tested crowd of a field brought through a year that gave Russ Coyle 8. That was a crop worth near $140,000 off ground. The Dale Orry had written off as a hobby in 2009, in the same year that the best advice in the county followed perfectly. Lost a good man his lake lot and a quarter of his crop, and very nearly his farm. Dale Orry heard about it the way a county hears everything. He was 55 now, still at the extension office, and he had spent the drought summer fielding calls from ruined men who had planted exactly what he had recommended, men he had known for 20 years, men whose ground he had walked and whose hands he had shaken at field days, and he had no answer to give any of them that did not turn to ash in his mouth. Because the answer was that he had been confident, and the confidence had been wrong, and a man cannot say that on the telephone to a neighbor who is losing his farm. He was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He drove out to Verna's place in the fall, not in a county truck this time, but his own. And he stood at the same fence where he had leaned 11 years before, and he looked at the field that was now cut to gold stubble, with the seed crop standing in the corners. And when Verna came out with Pick at her heel, he did not have his clipboard. "I came to ask you something," he said, and his voice was not the voice from the field. The seed you keep, the way you select it. Would you let me write it down? Properly, I mean. The university should have this. I should have had it 20 years ago." He stopped. "I told a lot of people the wrong thing, Verna. I believed it. That doesn't make it better." Verna looked at him a while, letting the silence have its weight, the way she always had. "It's already written down," she said. "My grandfather started it." Then, because she was not a cruel woman either, she added, "Come in. Theo can show you the book. He keeps it now." And that is how a credentialed man who had been wrong for 20 years ended up at a kitchen table under a hanging lamp, with an old canvas ledger open in front of him, and a young man who had once believed exactly what he believed explaining the firewall to him, while an old woman poured coffee. Dale Orry did not become a different man, but he became a student, which is the most a good man can do when the world has finally proved him wrong, and he spent the last years before his retirement helping the university build a seed bank of the old dryland land races before the people who kept them died and took the 100-year experiments in their heads with them. Let me tell you how it spread. because a thing that is not shared dies with its keeper. Word of the price and the field that survived ran through the county the way drought news had run the year before. The next fall, men who had not spoken to Verna in years came up her gravel drive, Russ Coyle among the first, and they did not come to pity her. They came to ask for seed. She sold it to them by the bag at a fair price, never dear, the going rate for seed wheat, and not a cent more, though Theo did the math one night and showed her she could have asked 10 times that, and they would have paid it. And she looked at him until he put the paper away. She told each of them the same thing, that the seed was only half of it, that the other half was the watching. And she sent each man home with a page copied from a ledger in Theo's hand, and told them what her mother had told the book in 1956, to walk the field before harvest and keep the seed of whatever came through, because the field would teach them more than she could if they would only watch it. A few of them did not have the patience for it, and went back to the catalog the next year when the rain returned, and she did not chase them, because the field would sort that out too in its own time, in the next bad year. Russ planted 40 acres of the old red along his south line the next spring, the same ground his hedge windbreak had once stood on, and he kept his place, and he and Verna were neighbors in the full meaning of the word until the end, which is to say they each minded their own ground, and Theo never went back to the city. He took over the books and the field and the seed shed, and he kept the experiment running, walking the lines each summer before harvest, pulling the heads that came through, and he married a woman from the next county, and they had a daughter, and the canvas ledger gained a fourth hand. Verna kept on. She right-sized nothing and scaled nothing, because she had never been trying to get big only to stay, and staying was the whole of the victory. When the contract money came, she paid off the small note that remained, fixed the seed shed roof, and put the rest by, and farmed exactly the same 640 acres the same way, because the land could carry that and no more, and she had never confused what she could grow with what she should. Let me tell you the last of it, and then I will let you go. Here is the thing that Field taught, the thing the whole long story comes down to. There are 2 kinds of knowing in this world. One is wide and fast and confident, and it measures what is easy to measure, and it builds its world out of the average year, the year that behaves, the year the spreadsheet assumes. The other is narrow and slow and patient, and it lives in one place long enough to learn what that place does in the year that does not behave, and it keeps, against all argument, the things that came through the last bad year. The first kind of knowing built the wheat that won for 11 good years. The second kind kept the wheat that won the 1 year that counted. Both are real. Only one of them, though, was paying attention to the year that was actually coming, and a system that measures only the average will always in the end be ambushed by the exception, because the exception is where the whole game is decided. What a system values and what is truly valuable are 2 different things. Daylori measured bushels, and bushels were real, and for 11 years bushels were enough. He could not measure resilience because resilience does not show up in a good year, and so he priced it at 0, and a thing priced at 0 gets torn out to square the fields for a bigger sprayer. Verna could not have told you her field's resilience in a number either. She only knew it the way you know your own kitchen in the dark, by having lived in it long enough, and she kept it not because she could prove it would pay, but because her grandfather had carried it across an ocean in his coat, and she was not going to be the one who let it die. What is rigid breaks, what bends holds. The field knew it before any of them did. Verna lived to be 83. In her last summer, Theo's daughter, who was 9 and quiet like her great-grandmother, the kind of quiet that is listening rather than empty, walked the field with her before harvest, and the old woman showed the girl how to choose ahead, how to feel the kernels through the chaff with a thumbnail for the ones that had filled hard, how to tell by the set of a plant which ones had come through the dry weeks standing, and which had only been carried by their neighbors. And the girl put the best of them in a cloth bag the way 4 generations had before her. Pick's grandpup ranged ahead of them through the tall, uneven beards that caught the evening light. The ledger sat open on the kitchen table behind them, 112 springs of rain recorded in 4 hands, and out in the field the experiment her grandfather started in 1911 went on running, one more bad year banked against the next, the seed of what survives saved by someone patient enough to watch. Quiet as anything she had kept it, and the field, in the year it mattered, kept her.